So when you say, like, I want to go back to what you said before about the comfort zone.
Hmm.
So was it hard for you at first? Like when you got there, like, oh my God, I'm so used to these disciplines, and now I have to like get involved in this or be more social or look at things from a user point of view more.
Exactly. It was thinking, in a way that you're not usually used to thinking in, and that is difficult, but that's what I had signed up for, and that's what I wanted to do. But it was hard in the beginning. You have to grapple with uncertainty a lot, because in hard engineering subjects you either have a right answer or a wrong answer, right? There's nothing in the middle. But a lot of what the real life isn't like that, and a lot of what you study at the high school, you have to grapple with uncertainty, and you have to grapple with things that don't have good answers, and that is a core part of you growing as a person, and that is a core part of you realizing that there is a different perspective, and you just have to live with it, and everything that you work with will not be black or white.
So did the school? Did you feel like it was what you thought it was going to be, or was it something completely different?
So when I came to Berkeley, I came with an open mind. That was one of the promises I made myself, that it's such an amazing place with amazingly smart people. It would be naive of me to just come with preconceived notions and just follow that. So I came here with a goal to, just see what happens and take it as it goes. Of course, I had some directions I wanted to go in, but by and large, things happened which I never expected would when I first came here. And this year, opportunities that you present themselves and what you are able to do with them, I definitely hadn't expected a lot of them.
Like, what are some of the things that happened that you wouldn't have expected?
So one of them was the whole Next Drop project. In the very first semester, the very first week of my stay in the School of Information, I started a class in Professor Tapan Parikh's class. He is an expert in the use of information and communication technology for development, and he offers a class at the School of Information which takes you through the process of creation of sustainable social enterprises. So creation of social enterprises which usually depend on charity and contributions, that's one way of doing it, but one of the his focus and what we learn in that class is, how do you build sustainable social enterprises, enterprises which not only do social good and have an impact, but can also sustain themselves and have a business model and actually, not depend on donations or charity or whatever it is. And Next Drop, the project I ended up working on the entire 2 years during my stay at the high school, came out of that class, and that was pretty surprising, because it was extremely interesting in how we were able to work in a multidisciplinary team, because my teammates and co-founders on that project, I was from the School of Information. There were 2 people from the Civil and Environmental Engineering department and one more from the School of Public Policy. And so this was a very multidisciplinary team, and we went ahead and we deployed it in India on the field, and in the process, we raised a bunch of money, won a bunch of competitions, and it is still progressing. So that whole trajectory of how just an idea became a real project in the ground, which now has a little bit of recognition, that was a very interesting process to be a part of.
Can you describe the Open Drop project just in concise, or Next Drop? Sorry.
So what Next Drop does is, essentially it tries to solve the problem of a lack of information in areas with intermittent water supply. So what intermittent water supply means is that in the US, for example, you just go and open a tap and the water starts flowing. But in much of the developing world, that's not the case. Is in that there is a piped network, but water is not supplied 24 hours a day. So it's supplied only maybe once a week. And the bigger problem is that people just don't know when the water is actually going to be supplied. So it may be once in 6 days, once in 7 days, once in 8 days. So there is a big social cost involved in sitting around waiting for the water, the uncertainty of not knowing when the water is going to be delivered. So there are a bunch of issues related to that, and that's pretty much most of the developing world. So what we wanted to do was, now that pretty much everybody in the developing world has a mobile phone, at least in urban areas. So in urban areas, the teledensity, that is the number of phones per 100 people, it's more than 100 now, because many people have more than a phone. And since everyone has access to a mobile device and you can actually reach them, how do we leverage that to provide information about when the water will actually arrive? So that was the problem we wanted to solve, and we worked on that. We did the ethnography and the field studies to figure out how exactly to best do that. And the interesting thing there is I grew up in India, and of course, being from a middle class family, I never had to face the same kind of problems that hundreds of millions of people face. So I never really thought of it from that perspective. But once I came here and started working with other teammates, then that's when I realized, you know what, this is a problem that needs to be solved, and that's what interested me. And I've always been interested in how we can use technology for social impact, and that's why I got involved, and that's what Next Stop does, and it's still a work in progress.
So working in like, did you find the student body there pretty diverse, and so you were working with people so different from yourself that you got inspired to other ideas, or what was your experience?
So in terms of diversity of the student body, I think on the Berkeley campus, the School of Information is right at the top, because you get to work with people, not just, there's an engineering background obviously in multiple fields, but philosophy, psychology, economics, and you name the field, there are people there with that background. And so that diversity, brings with it lots and lots of advantages, and you work with people on projects. Like I said, Next Drop, I got to work with, it's not just students of the School of Information itself, it's other students from around campus also regularly take classes in the School of Information. So the other teammates that I worked with were from the Department of Civil Engineering and the School of Public Policy. And so at the end of the day, the iSchool becomes kind of this melting pot of disciplines and talents and knowledge from around the campus. And sometimes something special happens, and I got to be a part of a project that's been doing pretty well now.
Okay. So if you had to name one, what was the very best thing you got out of the school? Like if you had to name the one super point that you got out of it, if it's the education, the collaboration with diverse people, the access to the professors, like what would be your most powerful thing that you got out of your experience there?
So I would say the one thing is having access to some of the smartest people in the world. And I think the most important thing is not just on campus, because my work during the internship and later startup, being part of this ecosystem in Silicon Valley, being part of the School of Information and possibly any other campus on department in Berkeley, it really helps you work with some of the smartest people in the world, and that in turn kind of increases your confidence that, probably doing big things is possible. And I would say the biggest thing I took out of it was confidence, right? That if you think big enough, you can do it, right?
Okay, and then out of these questions, before
Fantastic.
you got, no, this
Really,
is great.
really
I know.
fantastic. Thank you.
So if we're putting together, something to show other people, like a little webinar, mini film, or whatever, like what do you think it is that a prospective student needs to see, since it's so hard to describe this school?
Mm-hmm.
Is there any one like really couple of concise kind of points you can tell us that would have attracted you as a student?
So the one thing that is difficult to describe about the iSchool is you can't write about it. What I would recommend is look very deeply at the research that the professors conduct on a regular basis and the projects that students work on. That will give prospective students a very good idea about the kind of work that happens in the School of Information. And the usual mistakes that students make, that I think I may have made also, is to kind of try and pigeonhole the experience of the School of Information from other experiences that we already have. For example, engineers may think of the School of Information as from a purely engineering perspective with some slightly different things. Someone from a non-engineering background may think of it from their perspective, but at the end of the day, I don't think it is any of that. It is something completely different, which ends up, as a result of the sheer diversity of the student body. And one way of finding out more about that is to actually come and spend some time. I think the School of Information encourages students to attend classes, and there are a number of events which help students understand what exactly happens over there. But it's difficult for people. I couldn't have done that, for example, because I was all the way in India, but possibly that's feedback for the iSchool. How do you capture that and communicate that to people who are on the other side of the world. It's extremely hard to do, but you can't really understand that experience unless you have gone through it and spent a little time at the high school itself.
Let me ask you, how do you think the school, the education, when you're sitting around with a bunch of folks, you're all in the room, how do you differentiate yourself having been there? How does the schools, how do you differentiate yourself from the others through what you've learned? Like if you were sitting there with the Stanford grad, the Berkeley grad, UC whatever, how do you see yourself being differentiated? What is the distinguishing marks?
The differentiation, I think, is in the breadth of what you do. Of course, the flip side of that is you could say you're a jack of all and a master of none, but especially given what my trajectory of my career was, for me it was a very good foundation, because like I said, I had a pure engineering background, but now that I'm doing the startup, I can clearly see how what I studied at the School of Information has a direct bearing and on what I'm doing right now. For example, in the startup that I'm working on, there are lots of privacy related issues, and now I have a framework and tools to think about privacy and the legal issues revolving around that, and the privacy by design, and how do people think about privacy. And there was also the whole design and user centered design and usability aspect of it. As an engineer, I know for a fact that in my last company it was a successful product, but I personally did a terrible job of creating that user experience. In spite of that, it did well, and that was really surprising. But now that I've actually had an opportunity to study that whole user-centered design process, I can bring that to bear. So a student of the at the School of Information usually tends to be a very good generalist, in my opinion. Of course, you may have very specific skill sets that you learn and you already have from the past or whatever it is, but it really helps round people out in terms of their breadth of thinking and their ability to not just think of their own area of focus or expertise, but bring multiple perspectives to bear on a problem.